They thought they were walking into another reality TV interview, but one journalist changed everything. And what happened next exposed the truth viewers were never supposed to notice. So hit subscribe right now, because this breakdown gets crazier every minute, and you do not want to miss what TLC accidentally revealed. For more than 15 seasons, audiences believed they understood the emotional rhythm of sister wives. They thought they knew how the interviews worked, how the emotional moments unfolded, and how the Brown family, especially Kody Brown, always found a way to regain control of the conversation before things became truly uncomfortable. But something shifted during the January 2026 one-on-one special, and the shift was impossible to ignore. Because for the first time in years, viewers watched the family sit across from someone who was not emotionally invested in protecting the familiar rhythm of the show. The atmosphere felt colder, quieter, and strangely unpredictable. Almost like everyone in the room suddenly realized the normal rules no longer applied. And what made the special unforgettable was not explosive shouting or dramatic confrontations, but the uncomfortable silence hanging between every question and answer. Because silence exposed something viewers had never fully noticed before: how much of the show depended on emotional redirection instead of direct accountability. And the moment audiences realized that, everything changed almost instantly. Longtime fans began dissecting every frame, every pause, every shift in tone, because they sensed they were watching something far more revealing than a normal reality television reunion. This was not simply another cast interview. This felt like a test, one that nobody in the Brown family had fully prepared for. Because over 15 years, the family had become experts at reality television. They knew how to navigate emotional conversations. They knew when to cry, when to redirect, when to soften difficult moments with philosophical language, and when to use humor to lower the tension in the room. And for years, those strategies worked perfectly, because the producers interviewing them already understood the emotional ecosystem of the show. There was familiarity, comfort, predictability. Everyone involved understood where the invisible boundaries existed. And because of that, the Browns learned how to manage not only their own emotions, but the energy of the interviews themselves. Audiences saw it constantly. Whenever a question became too...
The camera. How they develop emotional habits designed specifically for television, and how entire production teams can unintentionally reinforce those habits over time by rewarding certain types of responses while avoiding others. And once that awareness entered the audience consciousness, it became impossible to ignore, because suddenly every future scene carried a new layer of interpretation. Fans were no longer just listening to what the family said. They were analyzing how they said it, whether the tone sounded rehearsed, whether emotional pauses felt strategic, and whether answers would survive the pressure of direct follow-up questions. And perhaps the most fascinating part of the entire situation was the fact that the special created suspense without relying on traditional reality television chaos. There were no explosive fights necessary, no dramatic walk-offs, no screaming confrontations, because the tension came from uncertainty. Viewers genuinely did not know whether the Browns could regain control of the room using the familiar emotional tools that had worked for years. And every time the journalist calmly waited through silence instead of rescuing the moment, the suspense deepened, because audiences sensed something important was happening beneath the surface. This was not simply a family discussing personal issues. This was a long-running reality television machine suddenly struggling to operate under different emotional conditions. And the longer the special continued, the more obvious it became that even TLC itself understood the significance of what was happening. Because networks do not bring in outside journalists for ordinary reunion specials. They do it when audiences begin questioning authenticity, when the familiar formula stops producing compelling television, and when internal production methods no longer generate the level of honesty viewers crave. And that decision alone quietly revealed how much pressure the franchise may have been facing behind the scenes, because the Browns had become extremely skilled at navigating the traditional format. They knew exactly how confessionals worked, exactly how emotional arcs unfolded, and exactly how to steer difficult conversations towards safer territory whenever necessary.
But the January special disrupted that balance in a way nobody could fully predict, because journalism operates differently from reality television. Journalists are trained to remain focused during emotional moments, to continue asking questions even when silence becomes uncomfortable, and to prioritize answers over atmosphere. And when those instincts entered the world of Sister Wives, the result felt almost shocking. Not because the interviewer behaved aggressively, but because she did not participate in the emotional choreography audiences had been able to see.
Behavior. How emotional habits develop under constant public attention, and whether the Browns themselves even recognize how much their communication styles have been influenced by years of living inside cameras. And those questions are far more compelling than ordinary reality television conflict, because they transform the series into something larger, a study of performance, identity, control, and the psychological cost of turning private emotions into long-term entertainment. And that is why the January special became such a cultural moment among longtime fans, because for 90 minutes, the franchise stopped feeling like a familiar reality show and started feeling unpredictable again. Audiences could sense the uncertainty inside the room. They could feel the emotional calculations happening in real time. And for the first time in years, nobody watching could fully predict where the conversation would go next. And uncertainty is powerful. Uncertainty keeps viewers glued to the screen because they believe something real might finally break through the performance. And during that special, audiences felt exactly that possibility hanging over every answer, every pause, and every uncomfortable silence. Which is why discussions surrounding the one-on-one continue months later, because fans know they witnessed a turning point, not just for the Brown family, but for the entire future of the show itself. What made the January 2026 special feel so different from every previous season of Sister Wives was not simply the questions being asked, but the growing realization that the Brown family no longer seemed fully certain how to navigate the room. And that uncertainty created a level of suspense viewers had not experienced from the franchise in years. Because for over a decade, audiences had become familiar with the emotional choreography of the show. Every conflict eventually softened, every difficult conversation drifted into philosophical reflections, and every emotional breakdown somehow resolved within the comforting structure of reality television pacing. But during the one-on-one special, that structure appeared unstable, almost fragile, as though one wrong question could expose everything the family had spent years carefully managing. And the deeper the interview went, changed the energy of every interaction, especially for Kody Brown, because longtime viewers immediately noticed how different his communication style became under the pressure of direct questioning. His usual emotional monologues shortened dramatically. His tone became more careful, more restrained, and at times, almost formal, as though he instinctively understood that exaggerated emotional framing might no longer protect him in the same way. And fans online became obsessed with analyzing that transformation, because they recognized something psychologically fascinating taking place. A man who had spent years mastering reality television, suddenly speaking like someone aware that his words might now be interpreted outside the emotional bubble of the show itself. And that awareness created one of the most talked about aspects of the special. Viewers could actually hear the shift in his voice. They could hear the difference between someone performing emotional complexity and someone attempting to avoid saying the wrong thing in a room where every answer might be examined more critically than usual. And that subtle change carried enormous implications for the future of the franchise. Because now audiences know the difference. They know what the Browns sound like when the emotional safety net feels weaker. And once viewers possess that comparison, every future confessional becomes more difficult to accept at face value. Because the audience has evolved alongside the show. Fans are now watching with heightened awareness, analyzing not only what is being said, but how it is being framed, and whether the emotional rhythms feel authentic or rehearsed. And TLC understands the danger of that shift better than anyone, because reality television depends heavily on audience trust.
Even when viewers recognize certain elements are produced, they still need to believe they are witnessing emotionally honest reactions. And the January special complicated that relationship by revealing how deeply performance and reality have merged together over time within the Brown family dynamic, which leaves the network facing a difficult challenge moving forward, because returning completely to the old format now risks making future seasons feel emotionally flatter by comparison. Viewers have tasted a different version of the show, one built around tension, accountability, and unresolved silence, rather than carefully managed emotional pacing. And many fans are already demanding more of that approach. Online discussions surrounding the special constantly return to the same question.
Themselves in subtle ways, through hesitation, through changes in tone, through attempts to regain footing during silence, and audiences became captivated by those tiny details in a way that surprised even longtime fans. People began re-watching clips, slowing down reactions, analyzing body language, comparing old confessionals to the new interview style, and debating whether the special represented the beginning of a permanent shift in how TLC handles the franchise. Because once journalism enters a reality television environment, the balance changes. Journalists are trained to prioritize answers over emotional management, while reality television traditionally prioritizes emotional flow over confrontation. And when those two approaches collide, one inevitably reshapes the other, which is why so many viewers believe the January special marked a turning point, not just for Sister Wives, but for the broader future of long-running reality programming. Because audiences are becoming more media literate, more aware of production techniques, and more interested in authenticity than polished emotional repetition. And the Brown family unintentionally became the perfect example of that transformation. After 15 years under constant public observation, they had become highly skilled at surviving inside the emotional language of television. But the special exposed how fragile that language becomes when the room stops cooperating with it. And now, every future episode will carry the memory of that exposure, because the audience cannot unknow what they saw. Viewers now understand that different environments produce different versions of the same people. They know that direct questioning changes emotional behavior, and they know the Browns are capable of communicating in ways far more revealing than the familiar patterns shown throughout most of the series. And that knowledge creates pressure on everyone involved: the cast, the producers, the editors, and even the network itself. Because once audiences begin searching for authenticity beneath the performance, ordinary reality television storytelling becomes much harder to sustain without evolution. And TLC appears aware of that reality, because the hiring of an outside journalist did not feel accidental. It felt strategic, almost experimental, as though the network itself wanted to test whether the franchise could survive a more confrontational style of storytelling. And judging by audience reactions, the experiment succeeded beyond expectations, because fans became more engaged, more analytical, and more One interview changed the entire future of Sister Wives forever. And after this, nothing on the show will feel the same again. So subscribe now, because the next breakdown is even more shocking, and you will want to catch